Good evening, gentlemen and ladies. Welcome to the Woven Art podcast. Today, our returning and distinguished guest, Dr. Andrew Bernstein, a philosopher, author, passionate defender of reason, freedom, and capitalism, is going to make the moral case for capitalism, and is going to introduce his essay, Capitalism in One Lesson, right?
Yes,
Maybe you.
this. Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Harry. I appreciate it. And here's the first, my first book on capitalism, the Capitalist Manifesto, which you could see is 500 pages.
Masterpiece.
Like, yeah, I did a lot of research for this, and then 20 years later, I had mastered this material and was able to reduce it to one essay. It's like 30 or 40 pages, the essential case for the capitalism in one lesson. So this is available from the Objective Standard and was published last year. Or when was that? That was the spring issue of 2024. So
Mhm.
it's about a year ago.
Yeah. Well, so thank you for coming back again. That's absolutely a delight for me. And let's begin with first kindly define capitalism. And if you can speak about the difference between capitalism, the way you understand it and the way you promote it, from what we know today as mixed economy or crony capitalism or whatever you want to call it.
I call it half-assed socialism, but okay. Uh, but first of all, it's great to be back, Harry, and thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me on a second time. Uh, define capitalism. I think Ayn Rand did that very nicely, where she defined capitalism as the system of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned. But to put it concisely, capitalism is the system of individual rights. To put it simply, it's a system that recognizes your life belongs to you. It does not belong to the state. It does not belong to the church. It does not belong to the family. Your life belongs to you. And Thomas Jefferson, despite being a slave owner, which we can legitimately criticize him for, but also did many great things in his career. Jefferson wrote it very nicely in the Declaration of Independence that an individual has the inalienable, built in, by virtue of being a human being, can't be alienated from us, can't be divorced or estranged from us. It's ours by human birthright, that each one of us has the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are noble words. And
Yeah.
that is the essence of what Ayn Rand means when she talks about capitalism, the system of individualism, and it contrasts with collectivism in any form. Collective, of course, means the group. So collectivism is the supremacy of the group over the individual. The individual, as the German philosopher Hegel put it, the individual has no rights. He has only obligations to the state. So collectivism in its most virulent, widespread form, National Socialism, of course, or Nazism, and communism. So capitalism and uh, collectivism are opposites. They're antipodes or opposites. Uh, and under capitalism, the government, you have inalienable rights, and the government exists to protect those rights. Under collectivism, whether the communist or Nazi variety, you have no rights. You have only obligations to the state, and the state of your life belongs to the state, and the state can dispose of your life as it sees fit. And we know what the state did under those two systems. The Nazis murdered some 20 odd million innocent civilians, 5 to 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, and millions of Slavic peoples, Poles, Ukrainians, Russians, who the Nazis believe were racial inferiors. The communists, not to be outdone, murdered at least 100 million in the Soviet
Yeah.
Union, China, Cambodia. Was that
Brutal.
the Khmer Rouge, Harry, the Cambodian Reds that murdered like something like 25% of Cambodia's entire population in 3.5 years in the
Do,
late
do you do you
1970s?
remember the quote that they had about
Yeah, that's what
value of life?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just getting to that. They told their victims, losing you is no loss. Keeping you is no specific gain. That's
Interesting.
losing you is no loss. Keeping you is no specific gain. The individual,
Brutal.
in other words, your life as an individual human being has no value in and of itself. The only value it has is service to the state. And if the state deems you're not serving it properly, it'll kill you. Capitalism and communism, Nazism, capitalism and collectivism are polar opposites here. Now, you mentioned the mixed economy. And the mixed economy is simply a mixture of these two, part individual rights and part collectivism, part freedom and part statism or government control over your life. And so, why would you want to mix? The one is freedom and individual rights. The other is totalitarianism, gulags, concentration camps, and mass murder. Why would you want to mix? Why
It's
would you
like
want to mix them?
mixing love making and rape, basically.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Or mixing nutritious food with poison.
Yeah.
And so, a good example of that in a mixed system is the government's controlling the school system. And I know the American educational system well, having gone through it as a kid, went through the public schools, but teaching college classes for many years now. I get the graduates from the public school system, and and then I did all this research on it to have my book on education. Yeah, I do. This is my book. Rudolf Flesch, who was Austrian Jew, as a matter of fact, who emigrated to the United States and wrote a great book in 1955, Why Johnny Can't Read. It was designed to defend phonics against any other whole word method, look, say, things like that. Anyway, my book, published in 2022, is Why Johnny Still Can't Read or Write or Understand Math, and what we could do about it. And speaking of mixed economy, I think the government school system shows us what's wrong with this mixture, in the microcosm. The government is not a productive agency. It's just, at its best, the government could be protective. That is, like Ayn Rand said, it has a legal monopoly on the use of force in a given society. And if it uses force only in retaliation against those who initiate force, criminals, to protect the rights of innocent people, the government is a tremendous benefit to human beings. But when it initiates force, it becomes, since it has a legal monopoly on the use of force, when it initiates force against innocent people, it becomes the worst danger.
Yes.
And look at the dictatorships. I just mentioned the Nazis and communists who, in the past 100 years, murdered 120, 150, nobody even knows, millions
There is a book
of innocent
called
civilians.
Democide, written by a professor from Hawaii University, that is like summarizing and collecting all the numbers of the.
Yeah, Rudolf Rummel's book.
Yes, exactly. And
Death,
I
death,
think the
death
numbers
by
is already death by
death by
government.
government.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
the numbers are reaching 230 million or something like that, killed by
yeah,
your own governments.
yeah, all over the world. The Nazis
Yes.
and communists is 150 million or more just themselves alone. Never mind all the other dictatorships
Yes.
around the world. But look at the government school system. I know the
The
American
Russian
system.
school.
Yeah, the Prussian school, right? Modeled on the Prussian school. I know the American system best, but I think it's similar in others. In some cases, it's even worse around the world. But first of all, it gets money by force. Whether it's by property taxes or income taxes, so the taxpayers are forced to pay for it, including whether they may not even have any kids. You don't have any kids to go to the public schools. They're still forced to pay it. And secondly, it gets students, I'm tempted to say victims, by force,
Hmm.
because there's compulsory education laws, and the kids have to go to school until they're 16 years old. And this was even worse back in the days when homeschooling was illegal. Today, I could give credit to the people who fought for homeschooling. Today in the United States, homeschooling is legal in every state in the country. And so people don't have to send their kids to to the public schools. In some countries, if I remember, there was a famous case in Germany not that long ago where the
It's
government
Hitler.
took the
Yeah.
kids away from the parents for the crime of homeschooling. They were homeschooling the kids. So when homeschooling is illegal, a lot of families, Harry, they can't pay twice for education. They're taxed to finance the government schools, and they can't afford to send their kids to private schools. And so in the United States, it's close to 90% of the kids go through the government schools. And you're going to get an inferior education. They don't have to, they have no economic incentive to excel. They get money and they get customers, students, by force. There's no economic incentive to excel. And the education you get is inferior. Yeah, and there's one last point on this, Harry. The
Hmm.
parents who homeschool in the United States, most of them have no training as teachers. And yet the homeschool kids, on any metric we want to use, any test that you want to use, the homeschool kids consistently score significantly higher than the kids in the public schools. So mixed economy is just a combination of force by the government and freedom. And why mix in the force by the government? It's always harmful. A free society where the government protects your rights, doesn't violate them, is much freer, and economically, it's much more prosperous.
Yes. Can you kindly describe what was society like before capitalism, economically and politically?
Sure, but something just occurred to me before we get to that. Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
And this is horrible too, but going back to the atrocities of October 7th, which is
Yes.
uh, uh, the Palestinians didn't win any sympathy from me, on that day. That's for sure.
Hmm.
Because they elected Hamas, right?
Yes. They
And
are
very
Hamas. They are not just electing it. They're supporting it. They are sending their children. They are indoctrinating their children into this. Yeah, it's very brutal.
Yeah, and just murder, kill Jews, right?
Hmm.
Uh, or Israelis generally, I would imagine if they had the power, they'd probably kill the Israeli Muslims as well.
They did actually. They took some Bedouins, and there was no distinction between Israelis or non-Israelis. Even they even killed and kidnapped Thailanders workers. So they took everyone.
They're
Yeah.
butchers, right? Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Does Israel have a policy of gun control? Are civilians generally restricted from owning guns?
Yes, it's very difficult to get a gun, and not only that. Before the 7th of October, it turns out to be that they took the long guns from the kibbutz in the area around Gaza. They collected all of that, and people
This is
weren't
it.
able. Yeah, they weren't
This
able
is
to protect themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, the Israeli government is better than many governments around the world. But I just think of the insanity of this, because most of the Jewish adults are IDF veterans, aren't they?
Yeah, but it's only good if we have the weapons for three
No, but I
years
mean,
exactly,
well, that's what I'm
from the
saying.
age 18 until 21. Then
Yeah,
suddenly maybe you become, insane person who can actually harm others.
yeah,
It's
right.
it's
And
it's
and
insane.
and Israel doesn't have a high crime rate amongst its Jewish population. I'm
No,
guessing.
it doesn't.
No. So I mean, it's insane policy when they're surrounded by enemies. It's an insane policy to legally prohibit the civilian population from owning guns, especially when the vast majority of the population are IDF veterans who
Yeah.
have been trained in gun safety. They know how to use guns and have used guns, often have used them in combat. And so I'm thinking, if the Israeli government had protected the right of Israeli civilians to own guns, then on October 7th, some of those people would have been armed, would have been able to more effectively defend themselves. Fewer Jews and Israeli civilians would have been murdered, and more bad guys would have been killed. Uh,
Yes.
I'm guessing. So when the government violates the rights of honest citizens, when you mix that in, Israel is generally a free society, much freer than many countries around the world.
Hmm.
Certainly, its Arab Islamic enemies, it's much
Yes.
freer. But this is an element of the mixed economy. Gun control means honest people are restricted in their ability to defend their lives and their children. uh, and so more innocent people get killed and fewer bad guys are killed.
Yeah.
So the mixed economy is just a mixture of nutritious food and poison. Don't leave the poison out. Let's have, have a free country. So anyway, I
I
just
agree.
wanted to I wanted to bring that up. You
Yeah.
asked about the pre-capitalist system.
Yes, how it was during that time, the starvation, what happened before wealth and abundance was created, how it really looks like, because some of those socialist professors and philosophers, they are describing it like a golden age, and obviously it was very deadly age.
Yeah, I mean, Frederick Engels is a good example of what you're talking about, Harry. Engels, of course, a collaborator of Karl Marx and a communist writer. Um, Engels wrote a book, Conditions of the Working Class in England in 1844, which published in 1845 and attracted Marx's attention. That's how they began to collaborate. And in it, Engels describes the terrible poverty of the English working class in the 1840s, which is real, relative to our standards. But then he goes on to say, prior to the Industrial Revolution, this is 1845, he's publishing Industrial Revolution, late, turn of the 19th century, late 18th, turn of the 19th century. 1785 is often considered the big bang of the Industrial Revolution, because that's when the powerful steam engines of James Watt, manufactured by Watt and Bolt and Company, were first applied to driving the power looms in the English textile factories. And Engels says prior to the Industrial Revolution, workers, they were better off. They lived in their little cottage, and they worked the land part of the day, and they had a hand loom, and they wove on the hand loom, and they made a shirt, let's say, and they brought it. It belonged to them. It didn't belong to the company. It belonged to them. By the way, notice here's Engels, the communist, singing the praises of private property.
Hmm.
But that's another matter. It belonged to the worker. He could take it to the marketplace and sell it, or he can wear it himself, or his wife, or his children, or whatever. And children worked a little bit with their parents, but generally they went to school, or they played, with their friends and everything. And he paints this picture of the working class before the Industrial Revolution. It may not have been ideal, but it was much better than after the Industrial Revolution. Now, there's a technical word in the field of philosophy for such a claim, and it's called bullshit. It's not just false, it's impossible. Let's get the facts first of all. So you look at the historians. Fernand Braudel, the French historian, wrote a trilogy on the history of capitalism. The Structures of Everyday Life, Wheels of Commerce are two of the books. Braudel is widely respected as a great historian. And he talks about the endless famine, in Europe prior to the Industrial Revolution. How many people starved to death in the late 17th century. As one example, 1690s. That was the Little Ice Age. If you look at the role of climate here, the climate was colder
Hmm.
back then, and there was terrible cold years in the late 1690s. They didn't have any, had made very little advances in agricultural science or agricultural technology. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people starved to death, literally, in Scotland in those years. They called it the lean years. Um, in Finland, Brodell says, I think he says maybe as much as a third, close to one third of the
Yeah.
entire population of Finland starved to death in the 1690s. The primitive technology and agricultural science was not able to cope with the colder, with the colder winters and the shorter growing seasons. So, Carlo Cipolla, Italian historian, wrote a book titled Before the Industrial Revolution. I was reading that. I was doing research for the Capitalist Manifesto, Harry, and it just popped my eyeballs when he said it was not uncommon to find people dead. This is before the Industrial Revolution, dead beside the road, on the side of the road, with their teeth in the grass and the dirt, trying to eat, the dirt, trying to get some sustenance. I can go on and on with the examples. Poverty was rampant, starvation level poverty, diseases, bubonic plague, of course, wiped out some ungodly percentage of the European population in the mid 14th century. You could go on and on with the horrors of the pre-industrial poverty. In London, for example, houses were made mostly of wood. The roofs were often straw. They were thatched, which were home to all kinds of vermin, rats, and lice, and everything. It was spread all kinds of disease. Uh, you think about this because you're prior to the Industrial Revolution. Samuel Johnson, very brilliant English writer, the first guy to develop a dictionary of the English language. Samuel Johnson said in the 18th century, I think this is the exact quote: London is a town in which houses thunder around your head, thunder down around your head, and the houses collapse on top of you when
Mhm.
you. Uh, well, why? Yeah, Samuel Johnson is a good source, and other people certainly have said similar things. Why? Well, what are you building houses out of back then? Man, out of wood. Well, can you hammer the boards together with a hammer and nails?
You don't have nails.
Yeah, you don't have steel.
Hmm.
That's a 19th century development. Henry Bessemer's process made it affordable to manufacture steel, and it was Andrew Carnegie was the one who first mass produced steel. That's late 19th century. Uh, so you're using iron, but how do you get iron ore out of the ground? You don't have any derricks or cranes or steam shovels or any power tools, so you're digging it out with a shovel. But the shovel has to be iron at its tip. You have very little iron. Very few hammers and nails. And so they tied the boards of the house together with rope or twine or things like that. And they thundered down around your head in a storm, in a heavy windstorm. And fire, the great London fire. What year was
London,
that?
yeah,
1666.
1666, I think.
Yeah, I think it was 1666.
Yeah.
Burned down huge parts of London. Everything's made out of wood, and the roofs are made out of straw. So it's a fire hazard of the worst kind. I think it was Mabel Buer, an English historian, who said, how'd she put it? She said the only good thing that came out of the London fire that burned down so much of the town was that the fire killed millions of rats and stuff, and thereby spared the city from bubonic plague for a while. The poverty is unspeakable, to use one of Ayn Rand's favorite adjectives. If you went to Africa today, the poorest regions of on Earth, you wouldn't find, even in Africa, is better off than Europe was, including Great Britain, but prior to the Industrial Revolution. Of course, in Africa today, at least we have some benefit of antibiotics, modern transportation with cars and trains and planes, computers. We at least have some of that. So not surprisingly, if you look at Wrigley and Schofield, who were the leading demographic historians of England, in 1760, on the eve of the Industrial Revolution, the life expectancy in England did not reach age 35. It was in the low 30s. After the Industrial Revolution, and because of it, you see a steady rise in the life expectancy. So it's a false claim that Engels is making, and worse than false, it's impossible. It's not possible to produce enough food for the population. When I talk about the Industrial Revolution, let me make clear, I'm talking about it as an effect of prior revolutions. The full truth is the scientific, technological, and industrial revolutions. A society has to go through a scientific, technological, and industrial revolution in order to grow enough food for the population, build houses. Before I get into, let me make a related point. The Prior to the Industrial Revolution, the reason it's impossible to create wealth, widespread wealth for a society, is everything is being produced by muscle power, by the
Yes.
work of your hands and your back, and animals, horses, and oxen added in. It's very limited, and sometimes you're rushing waters in the river. You use to produce hydropower, but it's very limited in what could be done. The Industrial Revolutions, it was the start of the machine age. In the manufacture of cotton clothing, prior to the Industrial Revolution, making clothes by hand, it's expensive. Takes, I don't know, keep the arithmetic simple. Let's say it takes 10 hours for the hand loom weaver to manufacture a shirt.
Mhm.
Goes into the marketplace to sell it. Well, he's got to be compensated for all the hours he spent working on the shirt. And the shirts are expensive. Clothes were expensive back then, and millions of poor people could afford only one suit of clothes, which they wore every day, and they couldn't wash it because you're scrubbing it with whatever soap they had available, with a stone and soap. You're scrubbing the clothes. It's wear and tear, and they couldn't afford to buy a second pair of clothes. Well,
Wow.
the textile factory, so it's filled with lice and all kinds of vermin and spread disease and stuff. But the Industrial Revolution, the factories are churning out thousands of shirts a day. It's much, much, much cheaper, and same quality, much cheaper. And so poor people, for maybe the first time in history, were able to buy more than one suit of clothes, and they could wash. They could wash the clothes now because they didn't rely on just one. So for the first time, probably in history, millions and millions of people were able to be clothed inexpensively and much more hygienically. With far fewer diseases being spread. You need machine power, which is embodied mind power. You need machine power. The Watt and Boulton steam engine, James Watt and Matthew Boulton, was the start. And after that, we see the development in the 19th and 20th centuries of diesel engines and locomotives and all kinds of power tools for construction, and Edison, of course, mastering harnessing electricity for a lighting system, and of course then the power of electricity to you have refrigerators and freezers and stuff that keep your food from spoiling, and so on and so forth. So it's no wonder the life expectancy rises dramatically. After today, 260 years ago in England, life expectancy was maybe 33 or 34. Today, for a girl born,
84. Yeah.
yeah, it's like 80 for a girl anyway. It's like 80 years, or somewhere in that range.
Hmm.
So machine power is applied mind power, and it's necessary. Oh, that's another thing I wanted to say. And I'm not a technologist. I'm just a writer and a philosopher. But I read what the technologists say, and they point out that the Watt and Boulton steam engine. This is the work engine of the Industrial Revolution. So industrialization, based on the advances in technology, that James Watt was able to perfect the Thomas Newcomen steam engine, and then go into production with Matthew Boulton at the Soho Engineering Works in Birmingham. Oh, by the way, Boulton had one of the great lines that should be widely recognized. When James Boswell, the Scottish writer who's famous as the biographer of Samuel Johnson, came to visit the Soho Engineering Works where the steam engine was being produced, Matthew Boulton said to him, "I sell here, sir, what everybody desires to have: power." Now that should be the motto of industrial capitalism, because there's power to do good and there's power to do evil.
Hmm.
And the machine power that enables us to manufacture consumer goods much more abundantly than by hand is a tremendous power for good. So yeah, I mean, Engels claimed that the workers of the Industrial Revolution are worse off than before the Industrial Revolution. It's not only false, it's impossible. You can't manufacture consumer goods, food, clothing, whatever it is that people need to live, it's impossible to manufacture it on a wide scale.
Mhm.
So
Also, we are not only speaking about life expectancy, we can also speak about the increase in total population. We have about 8 billion people, and this industrial revolution is supporting that. And
yeah,
it's very important. Actually, I remember in one of your incredible lectures, you're speaking about the idea that we have a problem with overpopulation. And then you said something about if you liberate the mind, maybe you can continue and speak to that.
yeah, yeah. The American economist Julian Simon wrote a very good book called The Ultimate Resource, published around 1980. And he pointed out that the ultimate resource, the most important natural resource in the world, is not oil or iron ore or coal or fertile lands or anything like that. The most important natural resource is this:
Yes.
human intelligence, because the other natural resources are useless until somebody figures out how to use it. I don't remember if we discussed it last week or not, but the beginning of the oil uh, industry, late 1850s in Western Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
There's this black stuff oozing up out of the ground in the farmers' field, and it's harmful to the farmers, destroying their crops and everything. And it was just some nasty stuff in the ground until somebody figured out, whoa, wait a minute, there's things we could do with this stuff. We can illuminate our homes, with kerosene for one thing, and then we realize that oil and petroleum products have tremendous productive power. One example, and it's really great to see the way innovations build upon innovations in a free market and in a free society. Uh, I was talking about Andrew Carnegie's mass production of steel in the late 19th century brought the price of steel way down from what it had been, uh,
I think it
enabling.
was 90% less.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It was way cheaper than it had been prior to Carnegie's use of the Bessemer process to mass produce steel. And one thing that look at that what that enabled. First of all, Henry Ford at the turn of the 20th century had this vision that automobiles would revolutionize personal transportation. Inexpensive steel enabled Ford to manufacture automobiles inexpensively, so that millions of American customers and then others around the world could afford a car. Rockefeller's production of petroleum products at Standard Oil, again, he did the same thing that Carnegie did, tremendously efficient, brought the price of petroleum products way down, including gasoline. What did gas cost at the turn of the 20th century? I don't even know, 3 cents a gallon, maybe. Uh, which enabled again Ford to benefit from that because he had inexpensive fuel for his automobiles. You go on and on with. I love the way innovations build upon innovations. The mass production of steel enabled the building of skyscrapers. The distinctively American contribution to the field of architecture, because
Yes.
if the steel was too expensive, you wouldn't be able to build skyscrapers. And the thing I really love about this is the inexpensive steel enabled companies like John Deere, and so on, to build farm equipment, tractors and combines and harvesters that American farmers could afford to buy, and enable that. Was it 2% of the U.S. population is farming
Yeah.
now?
Yeah.
90% in Thomas Jefferson's day, 2% today, producing so much food that we're all fat, which has its own set of problems, but it's not the same thing as your 3-year-old daughter dying of starvation.
Yes.
And so the way innovations build upon innovations in a free market is extraordinary. So this is the ultimate resource. Julian Simon is right. And you have 8 billion people in the world. To get back to your question, Harry, if we had individual rights and freedom, well, we need two things. We need a culture of reason, a culture that glorifies the human mind and thereby provides a real education, not leftist propaganda, but a real education developing the mind, a culture of reason, and then two, a politics of individual rights. The human mind, then, either gender, any race, tribe, nationality, you liberate the human mind, Then stand back at that point and just watch as a torrent of innovations in any field imaginable, from A to Z, from architecture to zoology or anything in between. You see advances in every field. They have 8 billion humans. Julian Simon makes this point very nicely, and Ayn Rand made it, years before that in Atlas Shrugged. Have billions of human minds then liberated in a culture of reason and a political system of individual rights to work on all the problems of human life, we'd be enormously more advanced than we are today.
I would like to ask, it seems like there is a relentless attack on those people who are basically the heroes of capitalism, those who improve the lives of millions, like Carnegie that you mentioned, and Rockefellers and others, and they are being called the robber barons.
Hmm?
Why is this attack is happening all the time, and you mostly hear that from the academics?
Well, sadly, so many of the academics in the United States, and I think in many countries around the world, correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably the same in Israel,
It
are
is.
leftists. The philosophy that they hold is generally Marxism. It's or some version of Marxism. Overwhelmingly, they prefer socialism or even communist totalitarianism to capitalism. So they're enemies of capitalism to start. And the reason for that, as Ayn Rand pointed out brilliantly, is their moral code is largely one of self-sacrifice. They've simply secularized. They tend to be secular, in many cases atheists. Uh, they simply secularized the old religious code. That we got to provide service to God, and the old religious code that we place God first, other people second, and you yourself are last. Uh, so the Marxists simply gave a secular version of that. You got to serve the state, not God, but you got to serve the state. Well, capitalism is not about service to the state or anybody else. It's about an egoist moral. It embodies an egoist moral code, meaning that you're pursuing your own personal happiness, you're pursuing your own success, you're pursuing your own self-interest. Capitalism economically involves the institutions of private property and the profit motive. So, I'm working for my property. It's selfish,
Mhm.
meaning it's for the self, not necessarily stepping all over other people, but it's for the self. So it's my house, my land, my farm, my business, my profit, my car, and so on. So it doesn't belong to you. I worked for it. It's mine. Private property is egoistic. That's it's for the individual's own well-being, and the profit motive. I'm working to make money for myself and for my family. So capitalism is selfish, in literally, and that's about the pursuit of self-interest. And historically, and today,
Mhm.
given all of uh, the dominance of a self-sacrifice approach, historically, whether we serve God or the state, uh, selfishness is always construed as, well, if you only out for yourself, then you're going to victimize innocent other people. You're going to step all over other people. You're going to violate their rights. You're going to victimize them. And so, if somebody made a fortune on a Marxist premise, if you're pursuing your own self-interest, then you're necessarily victimizing other people. It's an article of faith in Marxism that the rich get rich by exploiting the poor, which it's logical if you start with a self-sacrifice approach to ethics, and your belief is that egoism necessarily involves victimizing innocent others. And so, given the philosophy that these academics and journalists hold, they approach capitalism. It's impossible for them to recognize capitalism's life-giving virtues. I've had this discussion over and over again with people. I've pointed out the enormous increases in general prosperity for millions of Americans from the work of John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, James J. Hill, all these great industrialists, uh, it doesn't matter, but they're rich. They're rich. They were necessarily, exploiting somebody. They were bribing legislators, exploiting workers. Today, destroying the environment. They're villains. They're only out for themselves. They're necessarily villains. They can't see it. Given their moral code and their underlying philosophy, they're incapable of seeing it any other way. So,
Yes. I would like also to speak about the institution of slavery from an economic and practical standpoint. And if you can demonstrate the difference between the North and the South, and like obviously slavery kept the South in perpetual, how to say it, like poverty. Sorry, my English. So maybe you can speak about the difference and in what way capitalism and most of the people who actually supported capitalism were also part of the abolishment movement.
mhm,
So kindly
that's
speak
right.
to that if you can.
Yeah, I mean, capitalism. Again, leftists or Marxist intellectuals blame capitalism for slavery because you're pursuing your self-interest. If it's in your self-interest to enslave these poor guys and whip them to work for you, there's no moral principle that restrains you from doing so, right? You're just acting in your self-interest. Uh, now, the truth is, since capitalism is the system of individual rights, uh, you have every individual. It's ironic those words were written by a slave owner. Every individual has the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So Jefferson was hypocritical in being a slave owner, but his principle is right. His principle is true. The principle doesn't become any less true because the guy who wrote it didn't practice it consistently. The
Hmm.
principle is still true. Every individual has the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, on that principle, the principle of individual rights, logically and historically, an abolitionist movement was born in late 18th century England.
Hmm.
The historians sometimes don't do their job, and as a philosopher, I took it upon myself to do their job for them and raise the question that they should have raised, and that is, why here and why now? Why in Great Britain and why late 18th century? Because it's the Enlightenment period. John Locke's principle of individual rights is gaining currency in England and in the English-speaking world across the pond, in her North American colonies. And the idea that your life belongs to you, not to the king, not to the aristocracy, not to the church. Your life belongs to you. You need political freedom. Leads, of course, to the American Revolution. Leads to capitalism as against monarchy and the rule of the aristocracy. It also leads to abolitionism. The principle of individual rights means your life doesn't belong to the king or the aristocracy or the church. It also means your life doesn't belong to the slave drivers, or the slave owners. Your life belongs to you. And it needs to be understood, and too often is not, that capitalism and abolitionism are intellectual and moral siblings. They're brother and sister principles born of the same parent, the principle of individual rights. At the same time, late 18th century, in the English speaking world, where Locke's political principles, John Locke, from the two treatises of civil government, were influential. So capitalism is not the cause of slavery. That's absurd. It's the cure for it. And
Yes.
slavery has existed all over the world, going back into the mists of prehistory, and exists to this day. Every communist country uses slave labor. China does. As we speak, Harry, literally 10% of the entire population of North Korea is at brutal slave labor right now, as we speak, including
Yes.
women and children. All the communist countries use slave labor. In Islam, you can't enslave other Muslims, but everybody else is fair game. And in Sudan, thousands and thousands of black slaves as we speak, most of whom presumably are Christians. Certainly not Muslims. But anyhow, capitalism, the principle of individual rights, and the capitalist system. This is the cure for slavery, just as it is for totalitarianism. Same principle, right? Slavery and communism or National Socialism involve massive, widespread initiation of force by the government or by private individuals sanctioned by the government, to establish a brutal dictatorship and/or to hold many, many, many innocent people in
Mhm.
slavery.
Can you speak about the inventive period from 1864 until 1905? I mean, you already mentioned some of the main figures, but I think it's important for you to explain to my audience that this was the freest time in the history of the U.S. That was basically true capitalism. So, if you can describe a little and why they were not able to protect it, why eventually in 1905 and on with Woodrow Wilson and the one before him, I forgot his name, everything
Teddy
changed.
Roosevelt.
Yes, everything started to be socialized and change. How come people who enjoy the fruits of the creation of wealth and abundance and freedom, how is it that they do not protect it? Is it because of the public education, the indoctrination of the youth? Uh, what's
Yeah,
going on here?
that's a very good question. Uh, yeah, late 19th century United States, certainly in the northern states, I've is roughly 1865 when the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States to roughly 1905. Northern Securities. Teddy Roosevelt spearheaded the drive to bust up that brilliantly efficient transportation corporation, headed by James J. Hill, Edward H. Harriman, J.P. Morgan, which ran railroads all across the continent and brought prices. They ran their railroads so efficiently, brought prices, especially for shipping freight, way down, lowered rates for passenger and freight transportation substantially. Didn't matter how productive they were. Busted up. They didn't even have a monopoly, but they had a huge market share. Supreme Court busted it up. So there's that roughly 40-year window. The northern states of the United States, late 19th century, there was no Jim Crow laws. In the southern states, Black Americans were brutally oppressed. To some extent in the north too, but not nearly as much. But you look at it historically, governments oppress their own citizens constantly. Uh, Relatively, probably the freest period of history, not just American history, may well be the freest period of history, period. Uh, and so, Ayn Rand points out in Atlas Shrugged that the principle of individual rights and political economic liberty are necessary to unleash the best members of mankind, those who choose to use their minds, those who choose to think. So if this is the freest period of history, certainly it would be on anybody's shortlist, then we should expect to see a torrent, an outpouring of innovations in any field imaginable. And that's exactly what we see in that period. Thomas Edison, a very famous example, invents the phonograph, invents the electric light, invents the power station to electrify New York City, contributes significantly to the development of the motion picture projector, and so on and so forth. Makes a fortune. Alexander Graham Bell, Scottish immigrant, who invents the telephone. Just staying with technology for a minute before we go broader. The Wright brothers, couple of high school graduates, bicycle mechanics in Dayton, late 1890s. They're studying the principles of aeronautical engineering, by themselves, experimenting in their laboratory in the back of their bicycle shop. And in 1903, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, performed the first manned-powered heavy than air flight. Get this for a second, Harry. This is really extraordinary. So for thousands of years, human beings dreamed of flying. So in December 1903, the Wright brothers achieved that for the first time. Fewer than 66 years later, July 20th, 1969, the Eagle has landed right? Uh, Apollo 11 lands on the moon. I remember watching it on TV as a kid. I don't know when the when the lunar excursion module uncouples from the mothership and starts to descend toward the lunar surface, and you can hear Neil Armstrong, because the name of the lunar the LEM was the eagle. You hear Neil Armstrong, the eagle has wings, and then it just sends chills down my spine. And then you land on the lunar surface. The eagle has landed. Fewer than 66 years from Kitty Hawk to the moon. This used to be a great country. Uh, but anyhow, um, all these tremendous, the development of the skyscraper, you can go on with the technological advances in late 19th century America. But Ayn Rand didn't just say, liberating the mind was going to create tremendous advances in applied science and technology. She went across the board. So just a few other examples. Literature. The United States, 19th century, was a very young country with a small population. Look at the body of literature. Nathaniel Hawthorne, Edgar Allan Poe, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, Herman Melville, Mark Twain. Continuing into the 20th century with such novelists as Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, William Faulkner, and I would certainly add Alyssa Rosenbaum, who under the pen name of Ayn Rand wrote the two greatest novels in world literature, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and I will stand by that assessment till the day I die.
Mm-hmm.
Development of the motion picture industry in New York City, and then eventually moves to Hollywood overwhelmingly by penniless Jewish immigrants. By the way, development of Marconi invented the radio. He's a European, but where did he go to commercialize it? Came to America. RCA, Radio Corporation of America, founded on his principle, on his invention, his patent. And then through the years of the Depression at RCA, what was his name? David Sarnoff, another Jewish immigrant, had his eyes on the prize, had his eyes on the future, Harry. Even though this was Radio Corporation of America, he realized TV was the future. Yeah. And he founded NBC and worked to develop. He realized that TV required not just the technology, which had been invented by a Mormon. What was his name? Philo T. Farnsworth. I think what a great name in Utah. But Sarnoff realized it required successful TV required more than the technology. It required content. He founded NBC. Anyway, you can go on and on with the mass publishing industry, New York City, early 20th century. William James at Harvard revolutionizes the field of cognitive psychology. It had the world's first research lab at Harvard, 1880s. Freud, of course, for all of his errors and however crazy he was, Freud revolutionized the field of clinical psychology in Vienna. William James revolutionized the field of experimental or cognitive psychology at Harvard. You can go on and on with the examples. You liberate, Ayn Rand's point, you liberate the mind, and you're going to get these innovations in any field you want to name. Any field you want to name. And of course, American historians refer to this as the Gilded Age, borrowing a phrase from Mark Twain. Gilded means looks like gold on the surface, but if you dig underneath it, you're going to find a great deal of corruption. Well, I mean, there's corruption in late 19th century America because there's corruption everywhere.
Yes.
There's always crime and graft and fraud and corruption, but it's much, much, much worse in the statist regimes than it is in the free countries, because there, in order to survive, civilians have to bribe government officials and politicians and commissars just to, in the Soviet Union, for example, you needed an internal passport to travel. Let's say, you're living in Moscow and your mother is sick in Leningrad. You needed an internal passport, and if the state didn't approve, you had to bribe some commissar to get the permission to go visit your sick mother across the country. It's always worse. It's much worse in the statist regimes and in the free societies. But this starburst of technological advances in every other field as well, but mostly in technology. So that's America's specialty, right? Applied science and technology. This starburst of advance, you don't find that everywhere. That's rare, and that's something that we need to celebrate. And that's why I took it upon myself to rename late 19th century America. This is the inventive period.
So capitalism is both moral and very importantly practical. Can you speak? I mean, can you double down on that to bring that into the understanding of my audience? Because you made the case that obviously capitalism is moral because it supports individual rights and the creative mind, and then we can create all of that, and obviously that will lead to the practical side of improving our life and being prosperous. But if you can like summarize it into some crucial insight that you want to leave with my audience, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. That's the theme of this essay, Capitalism in One Lesson. The lesson is that capitalism is the practical system because it's the only moral system. Capitalism is the practical system because it's the only moral system. Well, what makes it moral? Well, this is the question of moral philosophy. What makes something good? And I don't know if we could do it. Ayn Rand gave a brilliant analysis of the nature of the good in her essay, and I recommend it to your audience, The Objectivist Ethics, in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness. It's a brilliant theory. I think it's true. It's very philosophical. I don't know if we want to get into that heavy philosophy right now, but to put it simply, the good is that which promotes human life, and the evil is that which harms human life. And I think most good people have always recognized that at some level, but Ayn Rand gave a brilliant argument and then integrated it into a full, rational, philosophic system. The good is that which promotes human life. Now, not everybody believes that. To the jihadists, the good is not which promotes human life. The good is that which carries out the will of Allah. Mm-hmm. And to hardcore environmentalists, the good is, they're not big fans of human life often. The good is not that which promotes human life. The good is that which promotes a pristine planet, or a clean, clear wilderness, untainted by human intrusion. But to Ayn Rand, the good is that which promotes human life. And politically and economically, there has never been a system, and never will be a system, that promotes human life in the way that capitalism does. Because it's the system of individual rights. Your life belongs to you. If your life belongs to you, it follows that your mind belongs to you. And as long as you're not a criminal, as long as you do not initiate force or fraud against innocent people, you are free to live as you will, following the judgment of your own mind. And this is a charter of liberation for all the thinkers in the world who make all these advances, who create intellectual and material wealth. We've been talking about material wealth, housing and medical care, and food and so on, but intellectual wealth also. Novels and dramas and symphonies and songs and movies and sculpture and advances in philosophy. Ayn Rand revolutionized the field of philosophy by creating objectivism. And she didn't do it in the Soviet Union where she was born. Well, she was born in Russia. But, she grew up, part of her youth was spent in the Soviet Union. She didn't do it in Russia. She did it in the United States, and so on. And until the creation of intellectual and material wealth that vastly improves human life on Earth. Let me put it hypothetically. If you care about human life, and most people do, capitalism is the system par excellence, by many orders of magnitude better than any other system that advances human life. So that's why capitalism is the only moral system. And of course, because it's moral, because it's protecting individual rights and the freedom of the mind, therefore you get all these advances that in practical terms vastly increase the life expectancy, living standards, and so on.
Should we call it capitalism? Shouldn't we call it and regain back the name liberalism or free enterprise? What do you think?
Oh yeah, that's the way Ayn Rand wanted to reclaim the term selfishness. From the traditional meaning that you're going to victimize innocent people and everything, to its proper meaning that to be selfish is to benefit the self. And what benefits the self is not being a criminal or a predator or a liar or a cheat, What benefits the self is to get an education, develop your mind, live productively, trade value for value voluntarily with your brothers and sisters, respect their right to live their own life, just as you wish them, demand for them to respect your right to live yours. That's what's selfish. That's what's in somebody's self-interest. Uh,
Mhm.
Similarly, you were absolutely right, Harry. I want to reclaim the term liberal. The term liberal, the LIB root means liberty,
Yes.
means the Lockean Jeffersonian principle of individual rights. It doesn't mean, semi-social, semi-socialist welfare state. Bernie Sanders is not a liberal. And he's a semi-socialist, maybe more than semi. Yet, when he got married in 1980s, he and his wife honeymooned in the Soviet Union. I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. They went to the Soviet Union to honeymoon. Does that tell us everything we need to know? He went to, by the way, he went to the same high school as I did in Brooklyn, but he's like, 12 years older than me or
Mhm.
something. But anyhow, he's not a liberal. He's a socialist, and he's still not a progressive. There's nothing progressive about socialism, or certainly not communism. It's regressive. Uh, I'm a liberal. You're a liberal. We're progressives. Capitalism is progressive. Capitalism is a system of endless progress. That's what we've been talking about. So I want to reclaim the term liberalism. Liberalism properly means individual rights, limited government, political economic liberty, capitalism. And by the way, you're right. The term capitalism, according to which historian you read, was either coined by Marx or by some earlier French socialist. At the very least, Marx popularized it. And notice it's a Marxist term, whether he coined it or not, because
It's a loaded term. It's basically weaponized.
yes, exactly right. So,
Mhm.
well said. He weaponized the term, meaning that the meaning of the word is that under this system, the men of capital, the owning class,
Okay.
have the economic power to oppress the working class. And they do so. It's the system in which the owning class have the power to oppress the working class. Capitalism. Yeah, it's a loaded term. It's loaded with Marxist ideology of class warfare. That the owning class is necessarily, inherently victimizing the working class. It's a bullshit term for a system of individual rights and freedom. Liberalism was the original meaning. In some parts of the world, that's still used to this day. Certainly not in the United States anymore, but it needs to be. We need to reclaim the term liberalism because that's the proper name for the system of individual rights and political economic liberty.
Dr. Bernstein, one last question, please. How can individuals today work to promote and defend the principles of liberalism in the face of growing opposition? Obviously, I think you would support the abolishing, I have problems saying that word, to abolish the school, public schooling, maybe closing the television, although it's like a very nice innovation. But what can we really do other than listening to you and the Ayn Rand Institution and read books? What can we do to understand who we are and what we have to protect and to advance freedom?
Well, that's a very good question, Harry. If we really want to advance individual rights and liberty, then we need to have an education. We need to know master the principles. First step, master the principles that validate liberty. So definitely read Ayn Rand, read The Fountainhead, read Atlas Shrugged, read Leonard Peikoff's book, Opar, Objectivism,
Yes.
Philosophy of Ayn Rand, and at least have some basic grounding in the principles of economics. Because the free market economists have done a great job showing that how and why capitalism produces wealth across the board, as in the immortal words of Frederick Bastiat, and Paris gets fed. Under
Mhm.
socialism, Paris or maybe Kiev maybe starve because I'm thinking of the Holodomor and Stalin deliberately starving millions of people to death in
Yes.
Ukraine. But uh, Paris gets fed. So I don't know if you want to go through the whole wealth of nations, although Adam Smith is very good. But certainly Henry Hazlitt's book, Economics of One Lesson, is brilliant. Read at least some of the great economists, Adam Smith and Jean-Baptiste Say and Ludwig von Mises and Milton Friedman and
Yeah.
and people like that. Frederick Bastiat, brilliant essayist, Henry Hazlitt, brilliant economic journalist, know the principles of freedom, both the moral philosophic principles that Ayn Rand provides, and the economic principles from the great economists. And when you have that, you can go out into the intellectual marketplace. Now you're intellectually armed, and in any forum open to you. And today with the internet, um, it's much more possible to reach people on the internet and social media. Although I find it's useless to argue with people on Facebook, but you go out into the intellectual marketplace in any forum open to you, speaking to your family members, just privately, speak to your family members, your friends, your children, your students, your colleagues, your neighbors. Advocate. Don't be a fanatic, but just sincerely talk to. If people are interested, all right, I'll back off. But if they show they're interested, we can sincerely have this conversation, urge them to read Ayn Rand, and any forum open to you on the internet. You don't have to be a pest or nuisance, but you could have a website. You could have social media. You could put. I don't argue with people on Facebook, but I'll certainly put up my ideas on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. Trying to reach however many people I can. So in any forum open to you, public or private, speak up. And if you're interested in politics, I don't want to go into politics, but some people do. You go into politics. You want to run for office. Great if that's what you love, and have the ideas to argue for individual rights, a free society, a free market. In any forum open to you, speak up. That's and if the woke mob hits you, as they will, hit them back 10 times harder. Don't be afraid of those bastards. Because, what I was thinking, whatever transgressions or whatever bad things I've done in my life, they've done things a million times worse. So if I've done some bad thing, I'll acknowledge it, apologize sincerely, and say, all right, you bastards, now it's your turn, or my turn to hit you, because you have done much worse things than I ever even imagined doing. Hit them back.
And you are absolutely more dangerous with your tongue than their weapons and their propaganda.
Yeah, they're cowards. They're bullies. They're cowards. I've noticed when you hit the woke mob back, too many people just kind of they apologize. They get on one knee and they apologize for being white or for being a Jew or whatever, being successful, whatever it is.
It's mental sickness already. Yeah.
Yeah, bleep that. You don't apologize. If you did something wrong, apologize sincerely, change your ways. And these guys are freaking communists. Hit them hard because they deserve it, and they'll back away generally because they're bullies, and bullies are cowards.
Yes, but of course we are talking about speech, not actually violence.
Oh yeah. No, I'm sorry. Yeah,
we are on YouTube. You have to remember.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. No violence, no initiation of force. When they hit you, I mean they're gonna attack you verbally.
Better arguments.
When I hit them, hit them back. What I mean is, expose their arguments as being fallacious. So no violence, no. Even whether we're on YouTube or not, the initiation of force is out for civilized human beings. We use it only to protect
only
ourselves.
For self-defense.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Kindly remind my audience about where they can find you, and maybe you can show them again your masterpieces.
Well, thank you, Harry. My website is andrewbernstein.net. andrewbernstein.net. So we have some of my books. Here's the Capitalist Manifesto, which was published in 2005. My book on education, why Johnny still can't read or write or understand math, and what we could do about it. Mm-hmm. Many of my essays, including this one, Capitalism One Lesson, published in the Objective Standard. It's the objectivestandard.org. You could get copies from them. And I should point out, just for fun, I'm writing, tough guy detective fiction, about my tough guy hero, Tony Just. And so Red Meat Village is volume 1. Volume 2 should The Night is Long will be out I'm going to publish it this summer. But the website, I wrote under the pen name of Chris Power. Yeah. And the website for Tony Just is just TonyJust.net. So AndrewBernstein.net for all the Andrew Bernstein books, and TonyJust.net for the Tris Power series on my hero, Tony Just. And
That's
I used a
wonderful.
pen name here, Harry, to distinguish, my serious writing from my purely fun, purely entertaining writing. That's why I use the pen name.
Yeah, I would like to say one thing before we end up. It's very important for me to have it on record. I'm following your work for about 17 or 18 years, and you add so much value to my life. You literally changed me from an ignorant fool to someone who can actually make sense of the world. And I thank you very much. You are one of the greatest for me. I really appreciate your work. Absolutely amazing. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Harry, and you are very welcome. I'm always glad to have a positive impact in the life of of the good guys. So
Mhm.
you're very welcome for that, Harry, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. So, with your permission, I will end the recording. And again, thank you for joining us. That
Oh, thanks.
was a
You're
delight.
welcome. Thanks for having me on. It's 2 times I've been on. It's always been a pleasure talking to you. And when you have the link, I'll put it up on social media and share
Of
it
course, I will
so
send it
that
to you.
great,
Yes.
so more people will know about your your podcast.
Thank you very much.